Thanks a lot for the introduction, Emily. It's really great to see so many of you here today. So, as Emily said, my name is Miguel Bernabeu. I'm Professor of Computational Medicine, and I'm Deputy Director of the Bayes Center. You've heard about the Bayes Center already. And my research is primarily around how we use computer vision methods to assist clinicians with interpretation of medical images. So I was excited to talk to some of you already. There are some key players in this space today here, so very warm welcome to all of you. And although a lot of the work that we do in my lab concerns how we take imaging data sets and we train models to do classification, segmentation tasks, and so on, we're increasingly doing more and more work on how we, first of all, implement those models into practice. So this stops being computer vision and starts being systems engineering, understanding sort of barriers to adoption and so on, and how we evaluate those AI systems in the real world. And I think here is where there is a lot of opportunity for university and private sector partnership. So we've got a number of projects that we are looking at how we evaluate in a sort of objective way AI solutions in healthcare so that this data can be progressed towards regulatory pathways, for instance. So we are very fortunate to have a panel covering a broad range of disciplines related to how digital technologies are shaping biomedicine and healthcare. So what I like to do first is to ask my panelists to introduce themselves and answer the question, how will new technologies shape our health? So I'll start with Kia.
Okay, well, thank you very much. I'm Kia Nazarpour, and I'm a professor of digital health at School of Informatics. My work is on promoting physical activity and facilitating the recovery from conditions that affect movement. And that spans from neurological conditions such as motor neuron disease and Parkinson's to musculoskeletal conditions such as disruption to movement before and after knee or hip surgery. The type of research that we do currently manifests into the development of affordable wearable technologies, like the wearable that I have now. It manifests in terms of a watch, but it can be placed anywhere on the body, and it can monitor various elements of compliance with the medical intervention or development of drug, how we can measure the efficacy of a drug in a real life settings. A lot of the work that we do sit on that end, and how it is possible to relieve the NHS from some of the loads that is affecting the NHS, and how it is possible to move some of this intervention to the home environment, or an intermediate stage between the home environment and the NHS.
Thank you, Kia. Kathrin?
Okay, I'm a social scientist, and I've worked in the medical school for about almost 20 years now. I'll never leave. So I was pleased to hear some talk about social science earlier, which is great. I look at how and why technologies fail, I suppose, and how and why they succeed, how they scale, how they become sustainable, how they're adopted and implemented in different contexts. So I work with Miguel, but on the other side of evaluation, basically. So we do formative stuff where we identify risks proactively and get them addressed in strategy, because if you identify them early in the design, then it's much more likely that a technology scales and gets embedded in work practices and that kind of thing. Do I answer the question too?
Yes, please.
Yeah,
How
okay.
will new technologies shape our health?
I suppose, so I would like to turn that around into how does health, and actually I think our health or our behaviors need to shape technology, because a lot of the time...
This is what social scientists do.
This is what social scientists do, exactly. So there's nobody else here, and I'm going to do it. Because a lot of the time, and academics are very guilty of that, yeah? We produce a lot of great shiny gadgets where the idea sounds great and policymakers invest in it, but actually it doesn't really address an identified need. So I think that's a big problem. And our perspective that we use to analyze these things is, we call it socio-technical perspective. So that implies that technologies always have social consequences. Yeah, they will always change the way people behave, the way people organize themselves. Yeah, I was just talking to Diego about becoming a cyborg. I just can't go anywhere without my computer. Yeah, and it just so it changes the way I behave, the way I organize myself. But also technologies. But also we change technologies. If we don't like technologies, we don't use them. They fail, they're abandoned. So yeah, turn the question around.
Thanks, Kathrin. Diego?
Thanks, Miguel. Can you hear me well? Yes, good. So my name is Diego Oyarzun. I work here at the University of Edinburgh at two schools, the School of Informatics and the School of Biological Sciences. And my work is related but slightly orthogonal to some of my colleagues here. So can I just do a hand check? How many of you know about genetic engineering, roughly? Okay. Good thing or bad thing? Well, you're enthusiastic. Okay. I did a stand-up comedy show last year on this. Yeah. I volunteered to do this, and the response was very different, right? So then I do AI and genetic engineering at the same time. Great. Yeah, right. But the point is, so flippancy aside, the point is that a lot of our work is about coming up with new ways of extracting actionable insights from biological data that we can generate in large amounts nowadays, and use that information to learn how cells react, how living organisms react when we do genetic modifications on them. And then the idea is to use those patterns to actually come up with new ways of genetic engineering those cells to do things that are useful for us, humans. And within the health or biomedical space, the kind of application things that we have in mind are, for example, engineering microbial cells, harmless microbes, to produce compounds, chemicals that would go eventually into the manufacturing process of a drug, of therapeutic drugs, for example. Now, the way those compounds are normally produced right now is through chemistry. And that is very carbon intensive. So one of the arguments to actually push this technology forward is that essentially using living machinery, using biology as a way of decarbonizing parts of the chemical manufacture sector. Another application in health is to actually engineer cells to actively interact with cells in our body and interrupt some disease processes, right? And there's plenty of work in that space too. Have I answered the question?
I think you have. How will new technologies shape our health?
Great.
Maybe you will. Okay. Thank you very much for the introduction. So, while we rescue Slido, I had a few questions of my own for the panel. So, I think it would be interesting to sort of just for colleagues to understand what kind of projects you are developing with industry already to try to sort of prime, some of the conversations that will surely happen later. If you gave us some examples of how you have made an impact on industry problems already.
Sure. So one area of interest that we focused quite a bit recently is the idea of the cost of AI. And by cost, I mean economic cost, the budget that you need, but it's not the cost that we've heard about several times in terms of the electricity or energy budget that you need to train and deploy these large models, but rather sort of the underbelly of the cost, which is the cost of data itself. So in many of the application domains that we work, acquiring data to train these very large models is either impossible or prohibitively expensive. And as a result of that, the cost of data actually becomes a very steep entry barrier for many, especially for SMEs in the biotech space that want to take maximal advantage of these new data technologies. So part of our work has been focused on actually bringing down these AI models kind of down to the ground, down to the end users, and make them design models that can be trained on data of feasible size at a reasonable cost that perhaps do not perform as well as you would if you had 1 million data points, but that they're useful for design. Okay, and we hope that this approach will actually lower the entry barrier to some of the small players in the biotech sector. A concrete example of this technology is a recent success story that we had in which we basically use this sort of kind of small size AI models for drug discovery, and we managed to basically discover 3 new compounds that target specific disease process. And essentially we managed to, instead of, if you would have screen compounds and test them for efficacy against a specific disease, you would have spent the order of £1 million screening about 5,000 of these chemical compounds. Using our algorithms, we managed to first shortlist that collection of compounds to 21. And we screen only those 21s, which is a 200-fold reduction in cost. And out of those 21, 3 were a success. So this is sort of one of the most exciting examples we have, where we actually, the development and deployment of this kind of small AI models can actually give large gains in efficacy and cost reductions as well.
Thanks, Diego. Any other examples from Kathrin or Kia?
Yeah, should I go next?
Go ahead, yeah.
So we do these formative evaluations. So we try to identify risk as it emerges. The problem is that a lot of the time people, it's an afterthought. Evaluation is an afterthought. So they call us in when something has gone wrong and ask us to fix it, and that doesn't work. Yeah. So ideally, a very recent example was there was an engineer who developed an algorithm to predict atrial fibrillation from ECGs. Yeah. And we did some qualitative research on that. We asked doctors, what do you think? Would that be helpful to have? And they were like, yeah, that's a great idea. And we asked why would it change the way it would work? And they were like, no, not really, because I don't work like that. I don't work with predictions. I work with evidence. So actually, it wasn't, developing that any further in its original form wouldn't have been worth it, yeah? So we saved quite a lot of work in terms of, I probably can't quantify that, it'd be quite interesting to do, in order to, it just wasn't worth pursuing in that way. So that's...
Yes, Kathrin. Kia?
So one recent piece of work that we did with industry was that recording muscle activity or measuring muscle activity is fundamental in evaluating recovery from the motor conditions. And for the past 100 years, muscle activity is recorded by analog systems and is measured and is recorded on a CD that is transferred to a laboratory and is analyzed and results are sent back. So what we did with a particular company was to even make those small machine learning models even smaller so that we can implement them on off-the-shelf chips that are available online or on the market, and then only we can measure and qualify recovery from the condition, and only send clinically important data back on the cloud, and then saving a lot of bandwidth, a lot of kind of other challenges in terms of data privacy, and we deal with them on the source. So that was another piece of work that we've done recently.
Thanks, Kia. So my next question, I will start with Kathrin, asking, for obvious reasons, what she thinks that are the most common barriers to technology adoption in health, and you've touched on that.
Yeah, and I don't like the term barrier. Sorry.
I always learn something.
No, but that's the thing. Yeah, if we think about barriers, we think about this whole thing from one perspective. But in order to make, and I can only talk about health and care, in order to make this work, we need to think about it from multiple perspectives. A barrier to one person is a facilitator to another. So what we need to do is we need to conceptualize it in terms of tensions and trade-offs, like what's a compromise that we can all get to in order to achieve quality, safety, and efficiency. Now, efficiency is a difficult one to achieve because that's very contested. Quality and safety, not so much. But efficiency, for example, in healthcare professionals, they spend a lot of time in data entry. They don't like it, yeah? Of course, they have other things to do. That might result in organizational efficiency, but to healthcare professionals, that increased data entry decreases their efficiency. So, that would be my plea. Don't look at it in terms of barriers and facilitators. I think it's very intuitive to do that, but it's just not the best way to solve the problem we're having at the moment in healthcare.
So I'm going to try again. What are the most common tensions to technology adoption? Could you pinpoint one in particular?
Well, the efficiency one is one. That's the biggest one, I think, at the moment. Yeah.
Any other thoughts from the panel?
Interoperability is another one. Sorry. Yeah.
Yeah, I think part of the problem is the question itself, right? The adoption, right? I think perhaps one of the biggest challenges is the potential mismatch or distance, unnecessary distance between different stakeholders and particularly between the people that develop the technology and the end users. And I think there's a need, particularly in the biomedical space, to kind of bridge that gap and move from a sort of technology push towards a science pull, in which end users are actually part of the process from the outset. In my experience working at 2 schools within the university, I receive research students and postdocs and so on from completely different backgrounds. So we have physicists, chemists, even a medic in the team and a mathematician as well. And some of the best AI that we do is the AI that actually has been developed jointly with the people that have the domain knowledge. And I think that's lacking sometimes in some application domains in health.
Thank you. Yeah.
But I agree with the comments made earlier, but I think one of the fundamental challenges, not barriers, are the different pace that experts in the digital technologies work and the pace that clinical experts work. And then these two can't catch up really with each other. And co-creation and coming together would be one of the most effective ways of doing that.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. So my next question, I will start with Kia, because if I understand, you've worked across industry and academia, you've moved across a couple of times. So from that unique perspective, what role can universities play in this space, and how is complementary to industry R&D? Because we are aware that some of the biggest developments in AI at the moment are being done by these sort of very well-funded, huge sort of labs that are outside universities. So it makes us a bit nervous about what's left for us.
I think that is true, and it is fair to say that competing with these giants of AI within a university with a couple of PhD students is unrealistic. But what we are good at or what we have the possibility is that we can develop these technologies in a commercially free in a commercially free or commercially less sensitive environment. I think we are best positioned to future-proof technologies for industry. So technologies that are very, very costly for some companies, probably not the like of Google or GSK or the companies that have potentially a lot of money to pour into this field. But there are a lot of industries that might not have the budget for the R&D to do high-risk type of research that can future-proof their business in 5 to 10 years. So I think we are best positioned to help industry to de-risk their future.
Any other thoughts, Kathrin or Diego?
Yeah, I mean, this is my area, but we can help evaluate technologies, right? Mm-hmm. So we can not only, we need to demonstrate if it works, yeah? So we need numbers for business cases going forward for getting more business, I suppose. And we need to figure out why it worked and how it worked. And in order to do that, and we need that because we need to scale and we need to have sustainable technologies. And I think academics are good at evaluation, and from my knowledge, I've never worked in industry, my husband works in industry, they're good at scaling, yeah. So, and they're good at figuring out what works for a lot of people. So there's a common core of a technology most of the time that works for a lot of settings, so it can be scaled, and a limited amount of customizability of that technology. So you need to balance, that's attention, a customizability and common core. So yeah, evaluation and scalability for industry.
Yeah, I would just add something that is perhaps obvious, but not mentioned as frequently, and it's about the original mission of an academic institution, which is to train people. And some of the students that we're training right now would hopefully be in position of leadership in different emerging sectors of the economy in 10 or 15 years' time. So I think part of the value that we can add is to actually train those people, future leaders, with data awareness and digital awareness, and make them help them to flourish in this kind of multilingual industrial environment in which, the biggest challenges that we face, as we've seen very clearly from the talks earlier on today, unanimously required, without exception, require the interaction between very different disciplines. And I would love to hear later on, perhaps from people in the audience. So what are from your standpoint, what are the skills that you normally see lacking in your graduate recruits, for example, and how can, as a university, in the leading position that we are, we can actually help bridging that gap?
Thanks, Diego. So I'm going to start fielding a few of the questions that are coming online. So the first one with 3 votes is, why does it take so long for technologies to be adopted by the healthcare system, especially the NHS? Should we take a COVID approach to speed up processes? I don't know who wants to go first.
That would be my 4th vote if I can do.
Try.
Yes, NHS is slow, but it is the nature of that huge institution. As if I'm not wrong, NHS is the largest employer in the whole country, and frankly, from industry, medtech industry, UK might not be the first place to commercialize technology. It might be in the US, might be kind of a first way of kind of going for commercializing technology, fund the R&D and development, and then come back to UK. I know in my own field in prosthetics, that's the way to do that. It is slow, but my experience as an engineer working with the NHS is that if you follow the guidelines that are in place and be not too disruptive, it's very likely that it lands in the right place.
Thank you, Kia.
Yeah, I agree. I think it's a risk-averse environment. Yeah, they don't have much slack to have kind of risky money, or that's the problem for innovation in the NHS. They have a lot of legacy systems that you potentially, I mean, depending on what infrastructure you're developing or what system you're developing, that you have to plug into. They have convoluted procurement processes that you have to go through. That takes a whole department that very small companies find very difficult to even finance the procurement processes. There's politics, which is often corrupt. I've seen it. So there's many different organizations. There's not one health care anymore. There's now health and care. So it's getting even bigger, and they're often in competition with each other. And they have different varieties of professionals working within them, all with different interests. So yeah, there's reasons behind that, but I suppose we need to figure out how to navigate it. And I don't know. I think just acknowledging that it's difficult and surfacing these tensions can help us to navigate it.
Diego, would you like to add?
This is a little bit beyond my area of expertise, but I would just add that perhaps in this application domain, some technologies should go through different checks and balances than in other applications. So we don't want it to be too slow, but in a way, the healthcare application domain should to have extent a bar that is a little bit higher than in other applications. Right?
I agree. Thank you. So the next question is, how do...
Can I just quickly
Please,
add?
by all means.
COVID, it was a disaster, but it revolutionized healthcare system in this country. Only 2 years ago, being able to speak to your GP was impossible, but now it has changed. So it is foreseeable to see that the way that the health and care are delivered can change very quickly.
Mm-hmm. Do we need a pandemic?
No, no, thank you very much. No.
2 years at home.
But what I'm saying is that a pandemic can change disrupt the whole way that we receive health and care services.
Thank you. So how do we foresee the impact that AI regulations, such as the AI Act, will have on personalized medicines? So can I sort of broaden the question a bit about, do we have the right regulation at the moment? Do we know what are the hoops that one has to jump? Or is a bit of, we're in the dark?
I think Scotland is at least 10, 15 years ahead of the game comparing to the rest of the nations. In Scotland, we have the Directorate for Digital Health and Care within the Scottish Government that has a clear AI policy and data for health and care. So the policies are available. It's probably take 5 to 10 years for those policies to become actionable and in real life, but at least there is a policy that makes sense on the paper.
I mean, it's not my area, although I talk to the people in regulation of AI in healthcare. But I think we're just feeling our way at the moment. It's new, and legal stuff is slow. That's just how it is. And we have no test cases, and our applications are continuously developing, and they're continuously learning. So that's something that regulation finds very difficult to cope with. And that's okay. I think it's important that people think about this in advance. Mm-hmm. So
I can pass on this one. I think it's way beyond my area.
If I can add another one. I don't know if there are people on NHS Scotland in the audience, but Scotland has a new scheme called ANIO, which is an accelerated adoption of healthcare technologies. So there is a bypass has been provided for companies and university innovation to actually bypass everything legal to be able to be in a position to create evidence and then be kind of tested for efficacy and efficiency. So those pathways are available, and there are companies that are actually working and delivering services to NHS in Scotland via those pathways.
So I think that links quite well with another question that I wanted to bring to the table, which is how can small organizations access big research, right? So you are explaining, Kia, that you are very well versed on the intricacies of how one goes around navigating these regulatory pathways. So imagine a startup with a few, 2, 3 people. It's quite difficult that they will have access to this knowledge. So how do we make it more broadly accessible? Is that via, for instance, partnerships with industry where we can guide?
Yes, there are. So our medical school is so massive, with so many people who have doubly affiliated to NHS Scotland as well as the university, and it could provide insight in terms of how to navigate these regulatory pathways, how to create evidence, how to design experiments. For a startup, I would say, do you really want to sell to NHS as your first client, or do you want to have another corporate to buy your services before creating evidence and then go to NHS and show evidence? It is very difficult and very costly to do this sort of research with the NHS, in my opinion.
Yeah, no, the evidence is crucial. Clinicians will adopt the application if it's shown to improve. If you can navigate the safety and quality for clinicians, that's fine. For organizations, you also need the efficiency and the money. But yeah, I think core applications. I mean, I've been in. You can partner up with academic institutions if you're a small company. And but it might lead to nothing. Yeah, that's the thing. It might be a learning experience. It might lead to scaling ideally and wide scale adoption. But it might also lead to nothing. Mm-hmm. I've also seen that. But it could lead to nothing without an academic partner as well. Potentially more likely, I'm guessing. But yeah.
So I've got a bit more of a technical question that I'd like to ask Diego and Kia perhaps to follow up on, which is, how do you get sufficient robustness with small AI models? Large models are already not very robust, let alone what this means for safety critical applications.
That's a very good question. So I do not think, so small models are less robust and more fragile, that's for sure. So not every application would be suitable for this kind of technology, right? In the space that I work, ultimately, what matters is that you try a specific genetic design, you try it on your cells in a wet lab, and see if it works or not. Now, if AI model, large or small, helps you to narrow down your search space, your design space, from 1 million possibilities to a couple of hundred, and you reduce costs in the lab, and some of the things that you tried actually work, then you hit the jackpot, and you have a product, and you have IP, and you have all that. So in some way, in the application domain that I move, the small AI models provide sort of, it's a decision support system more than anything else, right? They do not substitute the ultimate construction, testing, and prototyping of the actual biological device. That is costly, and if the AI models help you reduce the number of things that you have to try, the number of designs, then that's already a win. So the issue of robustness is quite critical in other application domains. In my space, it's not necessarily that pressing, I would say.
Would you like to add? Yeah.
I think one area. So if you look at the AI model, this is small AI models, and look at only the small data set, it is very likely that you end up with some sort of bias in the model. But I think one way to narrow down the search space is by looking into by incorporating domain expertise. So if you're working with a clinician, then you have some sort of hypothesis to begin with, some sort of a guideline at the beginning that these are the type of biomarkers perhaps that we are interested in. Or if it's a picture of the heart, we are looking at something on the right atrium. So if you find something on the left ventricle, either you land on noise, or you're waiting for the next Nobel Prize in physiology. So I think either way is interesting. But I think domain expertise is a really good way of narrowing down the search space.
Mm-hmm. Thank you very much. So a bit of a provocative question from the audience. So if any of you had the power to bypass red tape and processes to put one idea immediately into the world, what would it be and why? In the healthcare.
Oh yeah, that's good to know.
That's
very helpful. Yeah, thank you for limiting my search space.
Politics, I think I would eliminate politics. Because you can really see it has an impact on everything that's happening on the ground in relation to technology, but also everyday healthcare. I wish they would listen to us a bit more sometimes.
But any one sort of innovation that you think can make a difference?
Innovation, so there are a lot of red tapes around clinical trials. Mm-hmm. And clinical trials, by definitions, are very slow. If there are possible coming up with creative ways that you can have fast prototyping of clinical trials, mm-hmm. if it is possible to of course, in a way that risk is controlled, if you can try new interventions in a way that you can quickly tweak them on the fly and change. If you see that the experiment is not working, for a pharmacological, for a drug development, if you can stop that and tweak the proteins that you have on the fly, I think that would be really, really cool and exciting. Mm-hmm. But it's a very thick red tape.
Any other thoughts?
I would just say that some red tape is there for a reason, right? I wouldn't jump into the bandwagon and choose the one tech that I would like to push to people. I don't think pushing technology towards end users is sustainable necessarily. So I think, as I mentioned earlier, I think by engaging end users in the conception of the technology, we can actually convert this into more as a science or technology pull rather than a push. That's my way of looking at things.
Thank you.
Yeah, I agree.
Sounds good. So another question that I find personally very interesting, which is how can digital contribute to basically shifting healthcare from a place where you are unwell and you go to the hospital, probably by the time it's too late, to some sort of more proactive management of your own health. So what do you guys think are the opportunities there?
I think wearables, step counters, for the past 10 years, they have totally changed the way that we look at our health. We would be able to measure our heart rate with all sorts of noise that is there, all of the errors that are there, but we are a lot more aware of our health condition on a personalized way. I think if this is possible to somehow link this with our GP records, so it is possible to be able to, our GP sees that, there's a question of how often do you engage in physical activity, and the answer is that 2 times per week, but
which is not true.
Yeah, that was the chairperson's comment. But it is possible to actually provide data in a safe way that when the GP is looking at the health condition, they would be able to see in a metrics way or in a measurable way how one is leading their life. I think that would be very interesting way of looking at healthcare in the future.
I think the only problem I can see with that is data overload, because all the clinicians I work with complain about they're already having too much data. And you mentioned making data actionable. Yeah, that's our challenge of the future. It's not information, it's actionable data for different stakeholders. And
Can I just
sorry,
touch
yeah, no, please.
quickly? Because the question of once a week, 3 times a week, 5 times a week, that question is already there. That level of data is already in NHS. If our wearable would be able to answer that question, that very question in a measurable way, then there's no data, there's no additional data. It is that data that already NHS keeps. It's just that it's easier and has more, it's a more measurable way of evidencing it.
Yeah, and the other problem, I'm sorry, it's my job to come up with problems, but it's the inequality kind of thing, or inequity,
Yes.
So you're wearing a smart, like the Worried Well are wearing
This is a garage-made wearable for £5 rather than a £300 wearable.
But these things can exacerbate health inequalities. So for one person it gets fed back to the GP, they get better care. For the other person who can't use it, doesn't know how to use it, doesn't have money to buy it, that's, so that's a problem going forward, exacerbated equity issues. And I think there's a, in relation to the question, what was the question? How can digital contribute to shifting healthcare and link between health and social care, yeah? That's how we can do it. And that's why, and Scotland's pretty advanced actually. I've just been to Bermuda and they were like, what, health and social care? Completely separate. Scotland is quite high up there, and I think we need to capitalize on that. So not just shift people into the hospital where they get treated because they have nowhere else to go, but actually supporting them in their own homes. That would be my plea.
I agree with your point about technology perhaps enhancing or making health inequalities more pronounced. And I think this is something that is not that discussed typically. And there's always a counter-argument to every technology push that we may think of. There's always a counter-argument that is normally along this line. So it's good, again, to engage stakeholders early on to understand the actual problem that needs to be solved.
But do you guys think that there is any chance for some kind of trickle-down economics that sort of what is favoring someone more well-off will eventually make it to everyone else, or we're going to create these divides that are unbreakable?
Second, the latter, yeah. We are already, we have it already.
It's not a very good thought to end.
But going on that, but again, Scotland, again, between the 4 nations, is the only nation that we have this policy new document for a national care system. So in July 2022, the document came out, and that's revolutionary. We have in addition to national health system, we have a national care system in Scotland as well. So just try to make it a bit more positive at the end.
Exactly. So I like to give my own view on this question. So I think there is also an opportunity to educate the public on how they see their data. So it looks like you go to your GP and they take some records of you and that data is kept there. Then a few years later you go to a hospital and they take some scan and that data is there. But I think we should start asking, for that data back to us, right? Mm-hmm. Is there any way that we can sort of develop technology that allow us to gather alongside with the step count and the heart rate monitor, whatever blood test was done to us a few years back, and can we start to create this sort of very granular profiles of health over time? And I totally take Kathrin's point of overload of data, but it seems that at the moment, I don't think we understand that every time we engage with the healthcare system, we are generating data, and that we are missing an opportunity to curate it and put it to good use later on.
Yeah, that's a very interesting point. I think the data currently belongs to NHS. If you want your data, you have to pay 20 quid to buy it, which is the situation for a free service. As the world is changing, now even in the UK, a lot of companies in the care sector, they start with this proposition that data belongs to the user of the data, to the patient or to the person who's being cared for. And then when they want, should they want, they would be able to download their data, do a printout and show it to their GP. There's an institution called MyDex in Scotland again, or in the UK, and MyDex provides these services for a lot of care facilities. So the world is changing towards that. Yes, in my opinion.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that will provide lots of opportunities for kind of consumer side kind of apps. And
it empowers people to be in charge of their own health and care rather than going to this paternalistic way of delivering health. Go to the GP for health, go to the cleric for morality or for other things. It's old way of dealing with personal situation, but can be empowered by being in charge of our own health.
But there needs to be a user pull for these things. And I think with AI, the problem is that people don't understand it. I mean, I don't understand it. A lot of people don't understand it. So in Finland, they've got this course, I think it's called Fundamentals of AI, and it's for literally anyone to, there's a lot of stuff around healthcare professional education, medical education in AI skills, but there's nothing for the general public, for policymakers, for regulators. These people are procuring technologies that they don't understand. So I urge you to look up Fundamentals of AI and get your granny to take the course to demand her data, to be an informed customer. Yeah.
I can sign up to Base Center programs.
Why not?
For free.
Yeah.
So with this little bit of publicity, please join me in thanking
No, it's not our
great
program.
panel.